of doing our show, and we're recording. We are
We're
recording it
recording,
locally.
so the podcast will have everything, but
Yeah,
the live stream will
that's
not, and
okay.
that'll
That's
be
okay.
interesting.
Yeah.
That'll be
All right.
interesting. This is why you need to go to DevFridayShow.com or your favorite podcast apps, because we're everywhere, right, Mark?
We're everywhere. Podcast
We're
2.0. We're
yeah,
everywhere.
we're
Yeah,
everywhere.
that's right.
So that's why you need to go there to listen, because you will have missed the first 10 minutes of the show, and they're incredible. Honestly, they're really incredible. You want to listen to
And
those
also, you know what
minutes.
this does too, because you forgot to hit the go live button. It messes
Yeah.
up my time when because I look at the time on the live as
Oh,
my
you have no
guide,
idea. You have no
guide of
idea.
where we're at. So
I'll-
we're gonna go 10 minutes long.
I will wave fingers at you when we have. You won't know what they mean, but I will hand signal you, because I see the time on the actual on the running bumper music.
That's, I
But,
guess I can.
but when
I can
you
look
talked
now.
about subscription services with the Duolingo, the one thing I was asking my daughter, like, is it better? Is it worth the premium? And I guess what she was saying is, you can only do so many tests in the free plan, or if you want to retake it, you have to wait, or you need to build credits to then be able to do the quiz or something like that. And with the premium, you don't have to do any of that. You can just take the quiz or retake the test or go through the exercise. So it's like at the I think my the understanding I got is at the free tier, yeah, you can learn, but maybe not as fast as you want to. You can't do things quite at the speed you want to. You got to kind of wait for your credits to build up. Whereas once you get the pro tier, you can do whatever you want, which it seems like a good model for that. Because if you're just a casual language learner and you don't care about really spending a lot of time in it, maybe the free tier works. But then when you get serious, then you're going to pay for it, and that's the customers, they want to pay for it. So
Yeah.
I get it. And then the people
Yeah.
that have a casual interest, they at least are using your product. So when they become an avid user, that's what it costs
Yeah,
you,
we
right?
were
Is
talking.
people that are really using the site.
I don't know if it wasn't last
It was
show.
two shows ago.
We were talking about the freemium,
Yeah,
the
and
freemium shareware model, and how but I think Duolingo does a great job. They give you a lot of functionality out just with the free. The ads aren't that annoying, so if you just want to live with the free version, I think it actually is great. But once you start finding you use it, or if, with we have families or
Yeah.
people we want to share it with, it does make sense to kind of pay that little bit of money each year to kind of do the family or premium plan, because I think it does open up some nice features, almost like what you're talking about, just features that make what is it, use of what's the term, enjoyment of life. No, we have we make things easier.
It's just just more convenient.
Yeah. So there are features that you get with the premium plan, just makes it a little bit easier to use, and it gives you some more options. That's all.
So speaking of languages,
Yes.
I don't know. You seemed you were going a place last time. You had a topic, because
Well,
last show we talked pretty much about the dev.
True,
meeting.
and since we are sharing our job on the show, Tim, is to each bring a topic, and then what we'll do is we'll take turns each show starting off our topic. And so I did kind of preview my topic that I wanted to talk about, which is GitHub Copilot, which is what every developer is talking
That's right.
about.
I forgot about that. Before we
But-
go there, I had one question though. This is what you do to me, so I'm going to do
that's
it to
true.
you then. Yeah.
All right.
Speaking of languages, how's the C++ stuff going?
Well, I had to shift back to Python, Tim, because my object-oriented course I'm teaching in the fall. That's the thing I've been doing the past week since getting back from vacation. I've been getting back into the textbooks and reading that. My object-oriented Python, mastering op by building games and GUIs. So I'm reading that and kind of brushing back up with my Python. So I switched back to object-oriented, but with Python now. So
Gotcha.
So I
So
kind
kind
of
of
stepped away
stalled
from
out.
stepped away from C++ for now, because, like I said, I am going to be teaching next fall. I'm going to be, and also be teaching this course again, which it's been probably a year since I taught this course. Just trying to kind of brush back up on that. So,
And you're doing it with real games this time.
well, kind of ease our way. The final project will be a game, which they will make, but this textbook, or this book that is really good, because it kind of gives you some very kind of simple card-based games, or simple kind of board game elements that we can program with using the Pygame library. So I'm looking forward to it. I think it'll be fun, as long as the students. And the trickiest thing about teaching this course, which I've talked about, which is the computer science department wants to use this course as not just an object-oriented course, but a course to introduce the students to Python. and to give them the introduction to Python. So isn't that such a great idea by teaching somebody object-oriented programming while also learning the language for the first time?
Yeah, I'm not sold on that.
So
I'm still not sold on that.
That's the trickiest part about this course. I'm going to spend probably the first 2 weeks basically doing a crash course of the Python language. Now, if the students come, I mean, they should be coming from another language, whether it be C++, whether it be JavaScript, PHP, like they should have taken one of these courses that are prereq courses or optional prereqs that they have to take. They should have experience in one other language. And if they apply themselves, and that's my job of trying to translate, okay, what they know coming out from their prereq course and translate that, and how would they do that in Python?
But if they've had one course, you're saying you've just... It's not like me. Hey, I know PHP, right? So when you bring me another language,
yes.
It's like, okay, I can see the similarity. Yeah. Okay, this is where it's different. Oh, fine. This is a compiled language, so it runs with state. Okay, I get the difference. I don't have state in scripts. You have state in a compiled language that's running. I get those differences. The first time you've exposed me to something, especially if these are students that are coming from like a C++ background, right? Yeah. Or even a Java background, then you're going to throw in Python. You're changing the whole model because Python is a script. Now, Python is a script that runs more long than maybe other web scripting languages, but the context is significantly different.
Well, we're just talking purely from a syntax perspective, because I know where you're going with it, saying if you want to think about how this is either compiled, runtime, or what we're going to be.
Right,
I know
right.
That we get to that probably eventually, because like I said, the Pygame library allows us to, allows us to do some builds. But but just initially, the biggest challenge I had teaching this last time was just the students just couldn't get over the syntax. And they were like, okay, they come from like more of a C-based, curly brace, semicolon language going into Python. Their mind almost has to ease up, because they're like, they almost like, they don't think it's like, I don't have to type all this, and it's all white space, and also understanding the white space is challenging when you don't have the curly braces. So it's just a matter of like just getting them over that hump and just allowing to accept. Because I actually think Python's a great language to teach and to learn. And I do find, if you know one or two languages, learning it, and as long as you put some effort into it, is actually easier than learning something else, because I think it's it's relatively straightforward. I think I like to use it as a teaching language, but just getting the students just to kind of accept it in a sense, coming from another language, especially because, like you said, they've only learned one or two, maybe two other languages, mostly more likely just one language, and then learning that second language for the first time is challenging for any developer. Learning.
And you can say, like, if you know a language, it's easy, or it should be easier to pick it up. But when you're saying know a language, and know a language means we learned it last semester, that's a different. That's a different thing.
Year. Yep, that's true.
It still seems to me like it'd be better for a computer science department to say we are going to focus on maybe these one or two languages, and everything's going to be in there.
I know.
And only after a couple semesters will you go to the second language. Everything, everything for the prereq courses, or the first tier of courses, the 101s or whatever you call them, I don't remember. Those are all going to be this language, so you can actually know it, understand it, build upon concepts, because there's general purpose languages that can teach the different concepts and then when you go and I say I really want to go into whatever it is, I really want to go into game design, okay, well then you're probably going to be more in the C compiled language, using those bindings to Unreal or whatever the other one is, but
Unity.
Unity.
Okay,
but you want to talk about GitHub Copilot?
Be good, but this also kind of goes back into me teaching too, because GitHub Copilot does bring up some issues with me.
Is it going to teach for you?
The way that I know. Well, we'll get into that. Okay, first of all, every developer in the world is talking about GitHub Copilot. They've either seen it, demoed in a YouTube video, maybe they've taken a look at it, seen other. Have you touched it at all, Tim?
No, I know it's out of preview. I've seen other people use it. I've seen it suggest a ton of comments and weird things, and getting kind of like this weird cycle where it's like, I don't know what it's spinning off and trying to do. I have a fuzzy understanding of how they're doing it. They're training the model on other code. I think there's a lot of confusion, though. Yeah. Even in my mind, like, is it training? Is it copy paste? What exactly is it? And I feel like the entire world doesn't quite know that, because I hear people definitively say different things about it. And then I also noticed, did you see Amazon release their version of it?
Oh, I did not. What is it called?
I forget what Amazon's calling it, but it's a new AWS thing, like code. I forget what it is. Let's see. Amazon AWS Code.
Is it an online editor? Or does it work the same way Copilot does? There's basically like an extension or plugin that you could add to your IDE. Because I know they have their online code editor that I used to use a while ago. That links that easily allows you to integrate or start coding on top of AWS. It used to be called Cloud9. Not sure what it's called anymore.
Copilot, right?
Well, that's the GitHub Copilot.
No, yeah. Code Whisperer.
Code Whisperer, huh?
Code Whisperer.
Okay.
AI programming tool. Generate code from plain language. Similar to CodePilot, auto-completes entire functions based on only comments or a few keystrokes. That's feeling exactly like, isn't that what Copilot does? You kind of comment what you want to do. Like, and iterate over this list, and they're going to be like, oh, you mean for each and this and that. Currently supports Java, JavaScript, and Python on billions of lines of publicly available open source code and its own code base.
So this is great. So this even adds even more complexity in my mind about how this is actually going to kind of play out. All right. So
and it can. This goes to your question. It will run on the Cloud9 IDE, obviously, but also Visual Studio Code, IntelliJ, PyCharm, WebStorm, the things that you would expect from JetBrains. So it looks like that. I'd be interested to see once they train on PHP. Knowing Amazon, though, they're not huge fans of PHP. So I would not be surprised.
Well, let's not get into the Amazon
for a while.
cloud debate, because actually Amazon's probably the last place I trust my code too. So, but let's not get into that. Oh, you're totally. I can't hear you. You muted.
No, I know. I was telling children to be just a little bit more quiet for this. I'm trying to keep it professional, Mark. That's what I'm trying to do.
All right. So let me go back and preference, and I alluded to this at the end of the last episode, which I am a very big supporter of this concept of AI or machine learning, whatever you want to call it, kind of assisted code editing. And I do believe that in some way, every developer would use this type of technology in the future. Because I do think that, because I always believe too that programming would evolve from, let's say, typing out our code manually to where it'd be more of a visual approach. Once that would be kind of more of a streamlined process for developers who maybe are more like business analysts or understand the business process, but they don't understand the actual syntax of the code and do that, but they could actually start to program visually. I always thought visual blocks which is a big thing in some environments, like Unreal. The Unreal editor has a great system called Blueprints. Unity has something else that I forget what it's called because they bought a company. I think it's called Bolt, which does it like sort of like a visual style, and basically that then compiles down to or transcompiles down to C#, which is what it uses, and Unity or Unreal uses C++. But so I do think that assisted programming is going to be a thing, and it should be a thing. So I do think that, whatever it could do to make programming easier and more accessible. I think I'm totally 100% supportive, because my first experience of this was IntelliSense. IntelliSense on Visual Studio back in the day when I was learning the .NET framework for the first time. I would have had so much, especially when I was doing that. That was back in 2005, 2004. Actually, no, it's think about the years after my college, because I started .NET probably about 2 years. I did database development, and then I kind of moved over to .NET about 2 or 3 years after I graduated from college in 2000. And learning the .NET framework at that time would have been challenging. It did have online documentation that you could access, but it's not as like with the documentation we have today, which is very, very clean and user friendly. Compared to the way it was back then. And to learn a system like .NET and learn that framework for the first time, especially if you're not really used to using a framework, and that's basically your first framework they're using, so you're kind of trying to understand it, how IntelliSense works, where you start typing the code, you have an idea. Let's say you import a library into your, if you're using C#, which I think that's what it was used. I think I actually started out with VB script, or I think that was the first one that I used, then moved over to ASP.NET with C#. But then start typing out the code, and then the IntelliSense will just start to kind of give you hints or suggestions of either, what is the object that you want to use, or the method that you may want to call from that object, or what part of the library you want to start to bring in. And it'll really do a lot of help to kind of, to enable you to access that framework. And you learn the framework by working with the IntelliSense. And I always thought IntelliSense was Microsoft's best product. I thought it was perfect. So I used Visual Studio for a very, very long time when I was doing .NET work. And if I would go back to doing .NET work, I would absolutely 100% use Visual Studio, even though I know there's other, like JetBrains, like we talked about, has their own, like a ReSharper, I believe. Probably does
for Visual Studio.
They probably have their own, because I know
because
every big IDE has autocomplete now.
Yeah,
it does some.
And JetBrains autocomplete. Like I remember IntelliSense back when I did Visual Basic stuff, and it's super, like I said, super helpful because I don't have to remember things. And one of the things as a developer, it's always like, well, look up what's the documentation that I don't remember. I can't remember all these methods. I can't remember the signatures.
Yeah,
and IntelliSense helped with that. And then JetBrains autocomplete, or whatever they call their product, does the same thing, and that has continually improved. Right? It used to be, let me go look at the library and just tell you what the method is. And now it's the method plus let me fill out arguments, kind of indicate, well, this is the name, or this is the type of the variable, because if it's a typed language, I can tell you what it is. I can put that right in the IDE as you're typing. So you say, oh, I don't even have to remember the order of the arguments now. And to the point where some things, like if you start doing like a for each, in a JetBrains product, depending on how you have it configured, it'll build the for each.
Yeah.
It'll just build the for each, and it'll guess based off the variable name. If you have something that's plural, it'll pick a singular, or it'll guess based off the type. Like if I'm throwing something in that says, hey, I'm an inbound strategy, it will autocomplete and be like, I bet you mean, for a variable, you probably mean inbound underscore strategy, since we use camel case. And that's how I have my IDE configured. So that it's that notion of IntelliSense at its inception was, let me autocomplete method names for you.
Yeah.
But IDEs now are autocompleting much more, and giving some of that power to you. Like I write my own macros in there, so if I type test, it will create the stub of a test method, and it'll put the cursor right where I need to start typing the test name. But it'll have the return type correct. It'll have the annotations that it needs to tell PHP unit this is a test. It'll do all those things.
Yep. So now we have the next evolution. We have the AI has arrived, Tim. It's going to take over our code, both with the Copilot and this new Whisperer from Amazon.
How long until people look at code and say, was this written by AI?
This is, yes. And as a teacher, this is where I'm going to get to. I'm stressing about this. This is causing me a lot of conflict. And I'll talk about my experiences of dealing with copy and pasting code, and also when I promote it in classes and when I don't. But let's get also back to just what Copilot is, like how it works and how it differs from IntelliSense, where it does work similar ways. If you start typing it, it'll start to recognize your previous code you've already written. Like say you put in some import statements or importing objects from different or just different elements for different libraries. You start typing in, let's say, a function, and you name the function in a certain way. You put some parameters on it. It'll start to use that information then to kind of guess what you want to do next. Also, if you take to the next level of typing comments and describe what you want to do in normal language, which once again, this is something that I thought once people can actually just type just normal, words without having to worry about the syntax and let the computer then translate that into code. I knew that was going to eventually happen, and now GitHub shows it to you. So once you could, say, I want them to do like we said, I want to do like an API request, or I want to do I'm going to write a function with a promise, right? So I put that in the comments, it'll automatically generate that block of code for you.
So the stub is almost the boilerplate style stuff,
yes,
right? Like the tedious code.
Which once again, I'm 100% for. I think this is totally good. But then there's some issues here. Like you brought up, like how is it doing this? Where is it pulling the code from? First of all,
right? There's lots of conversations around.
Is it pulling it only from open source package, like open source libraries or open source repos on GitHub? Or is it also analyzing private and then using that information, private repos, and using that information in a machine learning way,
right?
And then reworking it so it's training on that. Yeah.
But not only that, that's one question, right? But even the open source side of things, if you're training an AI model on open source code, does the license of that open source code impact does it impact the code that is generated by the AI-powered tool? I don't know.
Well, this is okay. Let's even back it up too, because maybe you have a little bit more experience with like JPL or MIT licensing. How does it work granularly down to a line of code? So if I type because there's a lot of code that we write as developers. Like we went like write like a for loop, or we do
Everybody
like a
writes a
conditional
for loop,
statement,
right? Yeah.
yes, and
Yeah.
we're going to structure it exactly the same way. Let's say 95% of the time, right? So if a programmer writes like a for loop, and it was just a basic for loop, just iterate over 10 items or iterate over an array, and then they slap on the GPL license onto that. If somebody takes that, copies that for loop, if it is just a basic for loop, I'm only talking about like the 2 or 3 lines of syntax that actually makes up that for loop, is that like tied to that license,
Right.
like common code, common structures of code that we use. Like I don't know. That's why I'm curious about.
I think it'd be the same question if I go to a GPL'd open source library. I browse through it. I look at it. I'm like, oh, that's an interesting algorithm. That's an interesting way to process. That's an interesting way to work. And then a year later, I use that same interesting way because now I've internalized it and said, oh yeah, when approaching a problem like this, I could, instead of do it the way I would have done it before, I could do it this way because I saw code that did it in a similar algorithm. As you know, what does that license apply to? First of all, obviously, no one's going to be able to enforce that, probably, unless it's such a novel approach that they see my code and they say, well, there's only one other place in the world that attacks this type of problem in this way, and it's this GPL code over here. There's no way you came up with that on your own. You know, and I don't know. I don't know even if that's like, I don't know software licensing law enough.
Well, okay, just from
to know
just
if that
from,
would matter.
From what I roughly know about the GPL is that if you take, let's say whatever, what piece of GPL code, bring that into your application, in a sense, that part of your application is kind of GPL'd, right?
There's a lot of questions around that, right? It depends on which version of the GPL. Some people would argue more than just the code that you copied is GPL'd. Some would say that it's an infective license. That means all the code that touches it is. So there's huge questions already about that. And now we have this other layer of, well, what if you trained a model on GPL code? What does that mean?
Well, that's why I was wondering too. You mentioned this, like, is it purely doing machine learning and training, and then it's analyzing that and getting structures that it can then generalize, and that's what's being sent back to you as suggestions to be put into your code, or is it actually taking blocks of code, remembering that blocks of code, and then that is
basically
could be part of a license,
it.
basic copy pasting, yes, from another. And initially, I think that's what it was doing, because I think I saw a Twitter post or a Twitter thread about this, where it actually did this initially when it was in the beta or the private beta. Some people, when they're from a game developer perspective, were suggesting stuff, and it was actually taking code from the Quake source code that's on GitHub and suggesting to be placed into somebody's project. And that's not that
like you could tell it was from Quake.
No, they could. It was a game developer who did this, and because he recognized the code, because like I said, game developers study projects like, you know, the engine that was used for Doom, for Quake. You know, it's kind of just studying these old game engines as a way to kind of learn to, you know, to make your own game engine. So they recognized it, and then they posted on Twitter, and then John Carmack, the original developer of the Quake engine, said, yes, that was my code that I wrote. So it's kind of an interesting thread and it was also very early in the private beta time of this product. But initially that's probably what it was doing.
It was copy paste. It was not like, that's the same approach.
Yeah, I'm not sure. I can't remember if it was like a class or a function or what. I can't remember how much code that it did, but it was substantial. Where like they did probably what the developer did was basically put it in the comments, describe what they wanted to do, and that function that came back that was suggested by Copilot, what came directly from the Quake source code. So initially it was doing that. Now, is it doing that anymore now that it's public? Now people are paying for it and possibly using it in production code. I don't know. It's kind of interesting. Is it doing a combination of the two? Probably. Yeah. So it does bring up.
I'm guessing the argument is that argument of like, if it's open source, you could have read it, you could have learned from it. And then are you going to not use that idea? No, you've now understood the idea. If you've understood the idea.
Which I don't, that's a good question. I don't know the exact license that the Quake engine uses. It is open source, but I think it might be GPL-like, which I'm not sure how, you know, I'd be curious. I would want to look at the license and see how.
But that's going to be an interesting argument, because I think that's how it's probably going to be argued, is if it's open source, anybody can read it.
Mm-hmm.
Are you really going to say the knowledge that you gained from reading it now when you write code the license is basically applied now to your mind, to you because you've learned from open source, and whatever that license is has to be, because that's impossible, because, well, is it the GPL or the MIT, or I've learned from open source code of multiple license.
Yeah, that's
so
what
when I start applying ideas that come from all that, but like you say, if the AI engine is not as complex as the human mind, which it certainly isn't, is it just taking a more simple approach of, I'm really good at remembering things, not remembering concepts, but remembering literal things. And when you say, hey, I need to do this to calculate the distance or the velocity of an object flying through three-dimensional space. Oh, yeah, there's a game engine over there did that. And here's here is the code. Yeah. Let's just bring it in. And maybe it's because it's not a generalized concept enough that it could have multiple sources that were examples of how to do that. So it couldn't find the common thread. It's just like, well, I have one example. Here it is.
Yeah.
There's gonna be so much question. Well, I mean, there is right now.
So the licensing, that's one issue. Also, it's interesting how also this was in private beta for a while. They weren't really. I don't know how big the private beta was. How many people were in it? Because I even asked you. I said, "Did you get any invites, or do you know anybody who's actually
asked for it?" I know a couple people that were in it. I don't know if I even asked for it.
Because it's interesting that they released it. They do have a 6-day trial, which I'm in right now because I'm playing with it and trying it out.
Wait. They don't have an academic license, Mark? You're not gonna sweet talk your way into free software from yet another provider?
That's true. I didn't see that, and we'll get to the academic part of this too. That brings up a whole other set of issues that I'm going to get distracted by. But the cost is actually not too bad. Like we talked about, like the low cost of subscription software.
What is it?
Being around $10 a month.
Oh, that's nothing.
Doing like $100 a year. So that's actually isn't that bad.
I mean, if it's useful, that's nothing.
Especially if it's a tool that you use on a daily basis. I think it's kind of reasonable. But it is interesting how they came out of beta. They do offer this long trial, that is super nice. I do appreciate that, because you can try it out, see how much you actually use it, and seeing, because it really will take a month or more to really get a feel for it, and to especially like what I'm doing. I'm not using it full time. I'm just, because I do have it installed with a Visual Studio Code, which I think. Oh, no, I'm sorry, Visual Code, not Visual Code.
VS Code? Is that what you're talking about?
Yes.
VS Code?
Yes, I cannot talk and think at the same time. VS Code, yes. So I do have it installed there.
But tough for your students.
But like I've talked about, I know it's a challenge. But I've talked about it many times where like I love my Doom Emacs, so I got to get away from my Emacs because I can't use this inside of there, and I don't know if I would want to, because how that would work. But so I'm still kind of going back and forth between different editors when I'm editing code, and kind of keeping this installed in VS Code to just kind of try it out here there. So I do appreciate the long trial with this, but the fact that it came out, they're asking for money. It is a paid product now, but it also still feels like it's also still beta, because of all these questions or issues or with it, but then they're charging for it. So that's kind of also an interesting thing. What do you think about that?
I was distracted by reading this. I'm sorry. I just went to see how I could install it, and I was distracted by it said it's free for verified students and open source maintainers, which is interesting. Mm-hmm. So I think there is the play that's like, hey, if we've learned from your code, it's going to be free, I guess. Because that's your question, right? They're charging for something that apparently they used everybody else's open work product for. But
which I have no problem them charging for it. I'm just curious at the stage where it's at.
I do the same thing every day. Right, the software that I work on is a SaaS product that is built on open source libraries that we reconfigured in a way to make it useful, and that it was a product somebody would pay for.
Yeah.
So yeah, am I making money off of open source stuff? For sure. At the same time, do we sometimes open source stuff that we think would be generally useful to people? Yeah, like we try to contribute back to that community.
Yeah.
So is it wrong? Because what are they charging for? They're not charging for the vast repository of knowledge that is the open source code that's on GitHub. No, that's there, and you and me can look at it.
Also,
they're charging for the model and the training.
Yes, and they're also the telemetry on this is also, that's an issue too. Where I wish I wasn't on Windows, but I am, just mostly because of for game development, playing games. But the one thing I hate about Windows is telemetry. And you can turn it off. It does take some effort and to really get down into it. You could go to the register settings to turn the things that how much information is communicating back to Microsoft. But the telemetry is built into this too. It is analyzing your code. So it is how much of that information of your code is typing.
Okay, so that's what.
Well, it has to be in order to make some of the correct suggestions.
Does it? But so it doesn't just base it off of a comment.
No, it's based off of it. It's a comment, and also the previous code that you've written. So if you've written a previous function or conditional statement or whatever, it's going to analyze that and use that information for.
So it analyzes your code,
yes,
using a model that's been trained on a bunch of open source code,
yes,
then driven by the natural language comment you add.
Yeah,
and that I think one of the devs on our team that has used Copilot said he liked it because he could quickly generate test cases based off of other test cases. So if you just described, hey, in this case, and then it should fail for this, it did a pretty good job at just building the boilerplate stuff, which is really, I mean, that's what this is. If it's the next step of IntelliSense, it's just like the stuff that you don't want to have to remember or type all the time.
Yeah, and
it fills in those blanks. And then you do the rest, which I think is going to get to where you're going on the academic side of things.
Yeah.
What does this mean for students?
True, and like that's the other issue too. I'm kind of stressed about, because when you're teaching, programming classes, computer science students, or even just any web development or any class that involves code, then it's very easy for students, because what you do in these classes, I give sample code. I love teaching by doing. That's what I do. Like the way that I teach, I don't teach primarily by, slideshow presentations. I do have if I'm teaching a concept, maybe I'll do a short presentation like that to introduce it. The way I teach, I show code. I type out the code with it. We talk through it. We kind of, we iterate it on it together. If as we're kind of working through problems, I find that's the best way to teach and best way, at least for me, it is. And I think the students too, they do appreciate it. So I am giving them solutions. I'm giving them code. Also, for working through a textbook where I will reference code from a book.
Yeah, for sure.
And I ask the students read the book, type the code from the book, because just that practice of typing the code, even though you're just copying it, is a great learning process in its own. And so you can kind of see how it can work piece by piece as you're putting it together from a book. So I think I'm using code from different places, also different libraries. If I do use an open source library and reference it in class, we'll take a look at it. We'll look at the code. We'll look at the documentation, see how to integrate it into the project that we're working on. So I'm always sampling code. So I do allow students, and I do talk about the legality and logistics of like kind of trying to manage this, the open source world that we live in, how we could use this as a great kind of learning opportunity and a tool to learn how to program. But then we also have to pay attention to making sure that the code we're writing for the problem we're trying to address is our own, and we're putting that on top of it.
And I mean, to that, in that topic, Stack Overflow has an entire category for like homework questions, right? Where or questions can get kind of flagged that way. It's like, it sounds like you're asking me how to do your computer science homework.
Yeah.
So
I know it's funny. It's funny when you come across those questions like that, and you could tell like how the people are, like when they're reading are just, they could just it's a trigger when they say like, you can just tell this is a student just asking a question just to try it.
How do I bubble sort? Okay. Stack Overflow driven development.
So this is, and it's interesting because I was thinking about
how do you protect against that though right now? Just out of curiosity, like if you assign me, write this function that does this thing, or move this sprite, because you're doing the object oriented Python, right? Like, so create an object that will manage sprite animation, and I do the work. How do you know if I did the work?
Well, the way that the easiest way for me to tell, and honestly, it's only happened a few times since I've been teaching for probably about almost 10 years now, on and off full time. And it's the only few times I've had a direct kind of copy paste, or taken a project, or that was pretty much a code that you could basically download off the internet and pass it off as your own, is really if the project or the code looks too good. So if I look at it and it looks too perfect, right? Especially if I know about the student and kind of seeing them through
there's
the whole
no
semester.
Struggles, and there's no variables that they're no longer used anymore. You don't see the evolution of the code that they forgot to clean up.
Yeah. So if that's the first telltale, even from a visual standpoint too, I've had some students pass off web templates, Like you can download like an HTML CSS template so easily now. So and when it looks like a template, I could totally and I call them on like, where did you get this from? Like, and I do allow my students saying, if you want to start off with the template, use it as inspiration or reference, as long as you drastically modify into the design that you're trying to create to address the, the project, then I'm fine with that, right? I'm fine with using it as a starting point and kind of using it as a reference. That's totally good. But you basically just take a template, download it, change some of the content, throw some images in there, and then say you're done. I'm like, no. That's kind of
that's like watching Tim do front end work. That's that's nobody wants that.
So like I said, if it looks too perfect, if it looks too good, I'll question it. Because I have seen some code that I'm saying, okay, that doesn't look like the student wrote it. So I'll take the code in. Google does a pretty good job of finding where it comes from. Oh yeah, that's happened. So
because there's plagiarism tools, right? Like there's tools professors can use from a language arts standpoint to be like, was this report already written? Find parts of this.
It is
sources.
easier to do it for papers, because also my wife who teaches, she experiences the same thing where like you can tell if a paper, either she's seen it before or like the exact same paper, because there's a million websites you can download academic papers that other students have written and then just try to pass it off as your own. Or if she thinks it's been modified slightly, doing a search on, just with from like a paragraph from a paper, that would easily be found. Code's sometimes a little bit trickier. Google's actually pretty good depending on how you search for it, or GitHub. I don't know, here and there, sometimes you'll find some results. I did find something too, like it really drove me crazy last semester. A student had a CSS. I could tell, even if I look at the code, the CSS file that came from a framework, but he renamed the file, called it on his own style.css. It was basically a CSS style sheet from somebody else's made. I could tell that, but I could not find the source of it. And I spent like a week trying to find the source of the style sheet, because I couldn't, unless I can prove it, I'm not going to, I can't really. It is what it is.
Never ask a question you don't already know the answer for.
This goes back to Copilot, where I'm like, okay, now am I going to introduce this into class? I would love to, right? And I'm trying to figure out a way to do this. Like I said, I think it could be a great learning tool to help you learn a language or to learn programming. But also there's a lot of issues with that, where like the students just, let's say, write in a comment what they want to do. It puts in that block of code that it got from that comment. Then they're not going to do anything to it. Right, they're just gonna like let it be. So that's more
like the goal of Copilot is then you do something with it.
Yes, more than you're gonna customize. You're gonna need to tweak a little bit. Yeah, yes,
it's just that boy. So and that's like the tension in my mind between this is, it seems like it'd be great because, hey, here's the foundation. Now do two things with this: read the code, and now if it's code that you're like I've done this before, it's going to copy in it. I'm going to make a slight variation to my own code. Then this part doesn't need to happen. But if it's new code that their Copilot's like, oh, this is how you could do this. Mm-hmm. Read the code and understand it, because that's part of it, right? Understand what it does, and then tweak it to fit what you need it to do. And I feel like you're going to have some students that would do that, and those are the students that would find the solution online, understand it, right? Like they'd look at it and they'd go through, oh, that's how you. And then they'd write it, and it would be their own. It might be cleaner than it would be if they figured it out on their own, like completely on their own. But they're gonna say, "Oh, I'm gonna learn," because I mean, all the time I'm reading library code and saying, "Oh, that's interesting."
And that brings up an issue which I've seen many times, where like students who will see a blocks of code online on a website. Like, say if you're going to be using, let's say, jQuery, and use like a library in jQuery, which I don't usually use jQuery that much in my class anymore, but it's in the past I did. Let's say that I would use this jQuery library to do this carousel effect on a page, and what they do, they would copy the code, but then they wouldn't know how to. They might not. They
wouldn't understand it,
the proper place to put it, or if they need to change it, even from the HTML that would enable the jQuery to work on the page, to be comfortable modifying that after they did the copy paste. So I'm wondering though, if it's instead of a copy paste from a website, but it's more integrated into the actual project they're working, or the ID they're working, the way, and with Copilot, will it actually make the code easier to understand? Because the way Copilot would also probably work is like, the code is going to suggest the correct place to put it. Now it would be nice, which I don't know, I haven't seen this yet. Maybe it'd be nice too if it gave you more comments, or maybe it's a feature you could turn on with Copilot, or maybe it's something they could do where, let's say the block of code that it suggests and you accept it, but along with that there could also be comments that describe what it's doing, or areas that you might need to change. or to enable or
Okay.
enable the blocks to be more boilerplate, where it forces you to change certain elements of the code that it's putting in. That would actually be nice, because then it would actually
So
be a good learning tool I could use, and then the students could see, okay, it put in the right place. This is, maybe there's a few comments around that kind of describes what it's doing, but you do need to change it in these areas to to make it work with your the rest of your code.
yeah, I'm taking a look at some of the suggestions because I've honestly I've seen it in passing, haven't taken a
Mm-hmm.
hard look at it. But yeah, and what you're describing there is more like from a JetBrains perspective is they have, I think they call them live templates or something like that, where you start typing and then it's like, okay, we're going to create a method that does this. We need user input at this to name the
Yeah.
function, or this to name the argument, and down here to finish up this piece of code in this code block. So that seems like what you're saying is give me the rough outline and then actually guide me. Hey, you need to change this because this is this is the individual item you're operating on. This is the set of items. This is the output. And kind of see what you want is GitHub Copilot for education.
True. A customized version of it. I don't know. So it does bring up some interesting. So I'm unsure. Like I said, I'm kind of conflicted with that.
It's
I'm like,
yeah,
I think
it's
I think it's a great product, and I think it's the future. I think it's definitely not perfect now. It definitely needs to be iterated on and needs to be evolved, and we need to kind of see how it's going to do that. But I'm using it now as a professional. Let's say if you're using it in professional code and in code bases, is with the licensing issues you talked about, is that something you should be worried about or be concerned about? Or using it as education, and make, using it as a tool that could help students learn, but not just also make students more lazy. It's
so many tools are like that, double-edged swords, right?
Yeah.
Because on the one hand, this could make it really easy for a student to say, hey, this is the thing I want to do. Instead of me having to look all around and ask Stack Overflow and search and not find it, just give me some example code that pretty much, and now I can learn from it. Versus other students that may just be like, oh, it kind of works. I don't have to understand it if it works. And right? And isn't that really the issue?
It's true.
Is because if I can copy paste it and it works, good, I'm good to go. We're done. Other students are going to approach it and say, I can learn from it and I can understand it, and then they've actually learned from it. So it doesn't matter even if the result is literally the copy pasted code, because it's this, once you understand what some of these common patterns are, you're pretty much going to write the same code. Variable names may change, but you're going to pretty much write that same code. So you could get the same result, but one student just copy pasted, another student understood and then basically rewrote it, or again, maybe just copy pasted it, but they understood it. Which in the back of my mind as you're talking through this, you could do that with Stack Overflow, you could do that with Copilot, you could do that with, like you said, the code examples that you put in class and give to them.
Yeah.
The one thing that was in the back of my mind that's related to this is how much value I've seen working with other devs and basically doing either code review or live code review, right? Let's look through this. And because then you're saying, well, why did you make that decision?
Yeah.
And if you can't tell me why you made that decision, well, then it wasn't the decision that you made, right?
Yeah. No, I think that's great. Yeah, I was just thinking about that too, because that's what Copilot, that's its mission, right? To be your pair programmer, your AI-driven pair programmer.
Yeah.
So if that's how it evolves, where like it's less of a copy pasting from other code or learning on other code, but then it actually gives you suggestions, and actually kind of helps you analyze. You're saying, oh, do you really, is that the really best way to write it? Here's a better way to maybe form this API call or whatever you're trying to do, and it'll help you be a better programmer, right? If that's what it will actually lead to or actually become, that I'm totally 100% for, because I think tools like this will definitely make programming easier, make learning languages and learning frameworks, just like I talked about IntelliSense, that kind of helped me learn the .NET framework. So anything that makes that process of learning this complex job that we have as developers, or learning how to develop, is I'm 100% for.
Right, because you don't have to remember all of those things. And that's it really, from a learning standpoint, if it's applied right, it's better, because I don't have to remember all the syntax. I have to remember the why. Why am I trying to do this? Which
Yeah.
do I use in this context? Is that the right method? Is that the not method like method name, but is that the right approach? Is that the right pattern? Can I identify what the right pattern is, even if I might use a machine to help me spit out the boilerplate code on it?
Yeah.
Can I say, oh yeah, I need to assemble this, this, and this, and look at it at a little higher level? But what I'm even wondering about is, and I'm guessing your classes have too many students to do this practically, but just like if you want to say, let's use CodePilot, let's embrace the technology, but let's try to protect against a abuse of it in it's not really an abuse because it's technology, but like let's ensure that we're still learning while we use it,
Yeah.
is to almost do those code reviews and say, all right,
Well,
this is what you submitted, now walk me through it and tell me why is it doing this.
yes. Now that's where I was going with this. I totally probably going to be doing something, and I try to do that. What you used to last year in all my classes, which is a great experience, but also it brought up many of these issues that we're talking about today. Used the Replit for all
Right.
my classes.
Right.
And what I asked the students to do is that for each week's exercise, post a link to the Replit and give like the invite or shared link so you could actually go and see the code and post it to the discussion board like before class so that we could then view it in class together, talk about it. I'll go into your Replit project. I'll be able to kind of talk through your code with you and look at the issues that you had and we can kind of learn together. But what I find that some students do is that they'll take the Replit link that another student provided and they'll go into the code and they'll just copy paste from it. It actually happened last semester in my I think it was intro to web class, where a student did that and then they deleted the code. Like they basically did a cut and paste instead of a copy paste, took that block of code out, showed the code in their project. The other student called them on it. And it was like, I had to deal with that in the back and forth.
Nice.
And it was like it became an issue because just like the student was lazy and just didn't want to try to figure out how to solve their own problem. They saw a student do something with HTML and CSS. I think it was CSS, and they're like, "Oh, I'll copy that and put it into my own code." But they basically cut it out. Now, fortunately, Replit has a nice history,
right?
Sort of like a version history. So I told the student how to go back to a previous version of their project, and they were able to do that. But it just that like, and I kind of left that spring semester thinking, I don't know if I'm going to use Replit again because it's too easy. I thought it was a great learning tool that the students could learn together collaboratively, but then students are just lazy and they're just kind of like they're just going to copy paste, and it's just kind of I don't know if I can get away from that. So that's why I'm trying to find.
I guess too. That's
balance.
Another, and this is we are way out of time on to pursue this because I know you don't have a clock in front of you, but we have 3 minutes left. It seems like this can't go down this road. But once you get to higher ed, do you care? Because what they're proving is like, I don't care. Okay. I mean, I guess you care because you don't want to slap the paper and say, "Hey, you've got the diploma," when you don't have the work. But the truth is, they're going to walk out with that diploma, and if that was their approach, they're going to get a job, and they're not going to stay at that job because once people start expecting them to write code, and they can't because they're just copy pasting other students' work, it's not going to work out for them. So.
No, I agree with that.
That's a completely different topic.
The only thing I try to take some. This is an important thing to me, is because the program I teach is what's called an AAS degree. So it's meant to be a terminal degree where like it's meant to get somebody a job.
Right.
It's not. Even though a lot of our students transfer to four-year schools to get their bachelor's, our program is meant to be we're basically a job training program for 2 years, so that students can get an entry-level web development or web designer job. So it goes back to us. So that if we're producing students coming out of our program, that's
right. You want the job market. You want the job market to respect that, right?
Yeah. So.
Yeah.
I know the issues,
but I don't know. My thought, if you can do code review in class, that's the way. That's the way to. Even if you can't do it with all the students, I think that would be one way to be. Just random. All right, we're going to pick one. We're going to look through it, and we're going to do a code review. And I'm going to start asking, so why did you do this? Why did you do that? That you at least know there's that potential. Someone's going to ask me to explain my code. And that's the truth. Like, if you can't explain it, I don't care if you copy paste it. I don't care.
Yeah.
If you can explain it, that's the programming. Programming isn't did the characters come out of my fingertips. Programming is, do I understand why these decisions have been made and why we're telling the machine to do the thing that we're telling the machine to do. But one thing came to mind when you talked about throwing code into Google to see where they had stole it from. That's the story we haven't talked about.
Oh, okay.
The time that I interviewed myself. And
that's
how
you've been
I
teasing this.
I know
for months,
for about a better part of a year now. I don't know if that's going to be my topic next week, but
well,
that's
you're on deck next week. So
I saw a line. I'm like, that looks so familiar. I've seen it before. Let me Google it, and my mind was blown by what Google came back with. Maybe we'll talk about that next week. Who knows?
All right. Same
Same time, same great content next week.
All right.
I guess I can end the stream now. Sorry for those who were watching the live stream and didn't see the first 10 minutes. You should go to the that Friday show, and I'll see if I can get that up today. We'll see. All right. And